Welcome to Bible study. Today we want to do a little slideshow and talk about one of the interesting characters, or I guess maybe the people group that form a character within the biblical narrative about King David and his rise to power. And this, of course, are the Philistines. We mentioned them in the overview that we published last week, but they are such an interesting group. I just thought we have some great pictures and some things we might just want to talk a little bit more about David's time among the Philistines, who they were, and what we know about them. So let's talk for a few minutes about the Philistines. We, of course, have run into them already. David in his earliest chapters recorded in the text, he is going up against and slaying the great giant Goliath of the Philistines. And so David has been dealing with them for some time. Of course, he is also the one who, according to the song, he was the one who killed the tens of thousands of Philistines. He's very successful in his warring against the Philistines, because he has to be. The people need somebody to be successful against the Philistines, because the Philistines are a threat to them. But it isn't just David, and this isn't a new problem. Saul had been made king because the Israelites were losing too many battles to the Philistines, and the Israelites thought that a centralized military command, that's really what Saul was as a king, that would be a better way to confront the Philistine threat. But even before that, in the days of the judges, we have, of course, the story of Samson. Samson is noted for his valiant and heroic and miraculous deeds against the Philistines, but of course also for his foolhardy relationship with Delilah, the Philistine woman who ultimately seduces out of him the secret to his strength. And here we see in this picture by Jose Salome Pina, she reaches for the scissors to cut his hair and deprive him of his great strength. The Philistines in the biblical narrative are always the enemy. They are always the bad guys. The Philistines are perpetually bothering, attacking, or in some way threatening the people of Israel. They are sort of cast in the biblical narrative as a stock enemy. And hence the biblical narrative of them is very unflattering. The Philistines are never portrayed favorably. In fact, the biblical narrative will, on repeated occasions, rather want to laugh at them. It will take delight in moments when Israelites or people of God manage to deceive or trick them. In fact, the very narrative we're looking at here in 1 Samuel 27 through 29 has David living among them, but really David is tricking them. And the good Israelite reader is kind of laughing into his hat a little bit while David is deceiving the king of the Philistines. And as a result, our modern idea of what a Philistine is really convoluted. You call somebody a Philistine today, and that's not a compliment. That means they're uncouth, they are unsophisticated, they are really out of place. And here's a picture from 1982, not that long ago, by a French artist, and he just entitled this Philistine. But you don't need any interpretation of this picture to know what he thinks a Philistine is, because these people are skeletal and they are disjointed and their pictures are uneven. They just don't look normal. And the Philistines are these sort of monstrous, barbaric people. So what's going on with the Philistines? Where do they come from? Why do they suddenly show up in the narrative? They're not there when Moses and Joshua arrive. There are no Philistines, at least not here. But suddenly, in the book of Judges, they just show up. what happens? Well, we think, and a lot of this is somewhat speculative because we don't have great written records, but we think this is part of a massive movement of people that took place at the end of the 13th and the beginning of the 12th century BC. So we're talking right around the year 1200 BC. And really between that year 1200 and up to 1150, say, the eastern end of the Mediterranean world goes through a cataclysmic upheaval, driven in large part by these invading peoples who are coming from the east, or from the west, excuse me, but where? The person who developed this map clearly thinks they're coming from the north. You see a line of people coming out of the Black Sea. That is speculative. Recent genetic evidence has suggested they may have had connections as far west as Spain. But does that simply mean that these people didn't only go east and go east into the Mediterranean? Did they also perhaps move to the west? And do we just not have any record of their invasion and influx there? We don't know. The origin of these people is completely shrouded in mystery for us. But we know they were on the move. They were coming into this part of the world. The story that you know as the Iliad may in fact be part of this grand movement. That it may in fact be told from the perspective of the sea peoples coming in. That's where, that Achilles and Agamemnon and the rest of the heroic people of the Iliad against this established city of Troy, which would be right up there on the east, on the very western edge of Asia Minor, that was part of this movement. You see, in fact, this artist thinks so. The person who made this map, this is the city of Troy right up in here. They come sweeping across the eastern Mediterranean. All of these little red flame things are cities that were conquered at the time. Down here in Egypt, Egypt will be the only political entity that will survive this, along with Assyria, largely because we see the Assyrians so far east, and the sea peoples didn't penetrate that far, although we see evidence of sea people activity all the way down into the very southeastern portion of Babylonia and the Assyrian Empire at the time. So these people did not just come and bounce off the surface, but they penetrated into these countries and they were destroying. We have this entire layer of burned out cities that all correspond to this time. And so it appears this was a huge conflagration or upheaval that takes place right around this time. Our best evidence for what this was like in the northern part of this region comes from a city called Ugarit. In the early 1900s, a farmer discovered that the hill he was farming at this time was actually a ruins of an ancient city. And the archaeologists came in, dug it up, and we have here you see the excavated remains of a significant city that was close to the Mediterranean called Ugarit. The best part about the finding Ugarit was that we found the library. And we are able to read the letters, and oftentimes when they sent a letter, they made two copies of it, the one they sent, and they kept one. And so it's kind of interesting that we have both letters received and letters sent in this library that we found here. And as the sea peoples are getting close, the city of Ugarit was part of the Hittite hegemony at the time, and the letters of the king of Ugarit to to the Hittite emperor are just frantic. He's not getting any help, and the reason he's not getting any help is because it isn't just Ugarit. It is all the cities of the Hittite Empire are under attack, and the emperor just has no help to give. And and this gives us a picture of what it was like to see these sea people show up on the horizon and begin to wage war against you. Here's a depiction of them in their boats. They're coming in here. You see the big oars here, and they're these soldiers coming in and fighting. But our best depictions of them actually come from much farther south, and that is the region of Egypt. This comes from a funeral set of carvings that were made for Ramses III as they depict the glories of his reign. This is his repulse of the sea peoples. Now, he never calls them that, but he just says these people from the north, these people who come, and he got all these from the islands, he's got all these different names for them. But they have this picture drawn to depict this great battle where the sea peoples tried to invade Egypt, and they fail. This in the upper right-hand part of your screen, you see the mighty pharaoh with his huge bow drawn and his great arrows, and you see several of these arrows sticking into the sea peoples over here. You see, I love it that he has his own personal guy fanning him while he's shooting his arrows. I think that's a great image. You got comfort is important when you're pharaoh. But down here in these bottom panels, you see the Egyptians hauling off the prisoners. They've got these people bound and they're taking them away. And down here you see more of the sea peoples, and this appears to be more of a conflicted scene. They're fighting at this point. The sea peoples, you see these guys with the big dark headdresses in this image. Those are the sea peoples. And if you see these guys who have the smooth headdresses in this image, those are largely the ones who are the Egyptians. And up here, the Egyptians are the guys who are walking with their hands upraised, and the sea peoples are walking with their arms oftentimes in this posture of being bound up. So these are the prisoners down here. Over here we have the forces of the pharaoh arrayed in with their shields and ready to go into battle against the nasty sea peoples up here. This must have left a huge impression on the Egyptians, at least in the artwork that we see. We see a lot of this, and the chaotic scene right here really suggests that this was quite an event for them. What we also notice from the Egyptian paintings and carvings of this is that the sea peoples were not coming with these were not warring parties. There were women, there were children, there were whole households here. There were furnishings. These were people coming with an intent to occupy and set up homes here. The sea peoples were not like Vikings who would ride in and ride out. They were coming to stay. This was an invasion. This is a typical warrior from the sea peoples. He's got this leather helmet here with these kind of horns sticking out. Here's another one of the sea peoples attacking. These are a little easier to see sometimes when they do a monochrome relief of or monochrome drawing of the images here. Another picture of the sea peoples. You see the distinctive sword right there. You want to watch for that. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit later. After the sea peoples attack the Egyptians, it appears they kind of bounce off and bounce north and into what is the land of Israel. In this map, Egypt is down to the lower left and off the map here just a little bit. And they kind of bounce off and they land right in this region of the land of Israel. You want to pay particular attention to that little tribe of Dan, which is down there just north of Judah. They appear to have been almost completely displaced by the Philistines. They seem to have moved from this part of the land of Israel all the way up to the very northern boundary, where you also, if you look closely at the map, you see a city of Dan up there. Uh, that seems to have been later. That's where the tribe of Dan ended up having to relocate because they were pushed out by the Philistines. This is a more detailed map, a little closer to the region we're talking about. We see five principal cities of the Philistines: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. We also see a couple of other places that have shown up in our narrative so far. Down to the bottom here, we see the town of Ziklag. We're not sure exactly where Ziklag was. This is a guess on the part of the map maker. We've not positively identified the location of that city. Hebron, just a little bit up and to the right there from Ziklag, is the place where David will rule as king for the initial part of his reign. Gibeah, farther north of Jerusalem, that is where King Saul reigns and where his son, who tries to do a civil war against David, reigns. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. What may be of more interest to you is, of course, you see Bethlehem. That's where David is born, and that's where Jesus is born. And then you see the city of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is there at the time, but at the time, it's not the capital of Israel because at this point, while David is still not yet king, Jerusalem belongs to a group of people known as the Jebusites. They were a remnant of the Canaanites who had fortified the city of Jerusalem and had never been conquered. And so that will become the city of David, because when he becomes king, one of the things he does is he conquers the city of Jerusalem. This map kind of shows us a little bit of where the lay of the land is. It's a little bit later than this time, but it works for what we're talking about here. The red area in the lower left is the Philistine states. The kingdom of Judah, that's the tribe of Judah, is basically right adjacent to them. The kingdom of Israel, which is far larger and involves the 10 northern tribes, is the blue area, and that also butts up against the Philistines who are there. And then, of course, on the east side, you see this ring of three other states. They look like they're just as big as the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. But you have to remember that on the other side of the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan, it's very much a desert. And the population density is much thinner. They have territorially a large part of the world, but there's not a lot of people who live there. The Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites are fairly thin. We have done a lot of excavation among the Philistines, the region of the Philistines, and here we see the excavations that are going on at Gath. We've been digging around there, so we've learned a few things that maybe that image we have of the Philistines might not be entirely accurate. One of the things we find there, and as we find in many of these old cities, and because it is durable, this is what we get, is pottery. And the people who are archaeologists become masters of pottery. They study the finest details of it. And what they tell us of looking at this is this looks a lot like Mycenaean pottery. This looks like the pottery that's coming out of the Greek islands. Now, does this mean that the Sea Peoples came from there? Maybe. It might also mean that the Sea Peoples simply learned this pottery style on their way through. Again, we don't know. But clearly these guys are not local to the Israelites, because the Israelites have a different kind of pottery that they make. This is actually a far more sophisticated pottery. It's a better manufacturing process, and it is very common. The Philistines appear to have made a great deal of this pottery, and it suggests a level of sophistication, both in its artistic form And in the painting that we see on it, these are kind of abstractions. They're not so much the literalism we see in some pottery of the time, or the geometric shapes of some of them. We see a lot more kind of abstraction of things going on in in this pottery, which suggests this is actually a fairly sophisticated society. Here's um, another picture of some Philistine pottery from the time. We do have a little bit of written material that comes from the Philistines. If you are able to read this, would you please get in contact with the archaeologists and the linguists who are studying Philistia, because nobody else can read this. This is just a mystery to us. We have these little documents. We don't have much of it, and the orthography, the letters that they're using here, we just can't make heads nor tails of it. We don't even necessarily know which way to read it, right to left or left to right, top to bottom. It's a bit of a mystery to us. um, when David arrived in the land of the Philistines, he would have encountered another religion. He would have encountered a non-Yahwist religion of the time, and this is an altar we have found in Philistia. It's a two-horned altar. We don't know if there was more of it and there were like two more horns on the other side, or was this all there was to this thing? We're not sure. But it was a competing religious sphere in which David would have found himself. But probably the most important thing, do you remember those swords I showed you with the guys holding them up in the Egyptian picture? Would have been the Philistines' knowledge of iron. Again, we don't know where exactly they picked it up. We know the Hittites had it, and it's quite possible that in the course of conquering the Hittites, they simply stole it. Or it may be that they had it already. But the Israelites did not. The Israelites were still a late Bronze Age culture. And that means that they were making weaponry out of bronze. And bronze is an easier metal to work with, but it is brittle, and it requires it to be much more massive when you make something out of bronze. That can be good for a piece of art, but when you are talking about a sword, not so much, because weight is your enemy in a sword. It makes you slower, and because bronze was brittle, it still had a penchant for breaking on you in the middle of a battle. And so the Philistines coming in with the ability and the knowledge of how to work an iron sword, or an iron weapon, would have given them a significant tactical advantage over their Israelite foes. In fact, this is probably why the Israelites select a king. They're looking to maximize the one advantage they have, which is likely numbers. They can simply bring more people into a battle than the Philistines can, but the Philistines come with these superior weapons, and so you're going to overcome him by sheer numbers. But that takes organization. You got to have somebody who can organize the tribes of Israel into a cohesive army and attack the Philistines in mass in order to overcome them and defeat them in battle. And it appears largely to have been the case that the Israelites were never able to defeat them because the Philistines had this technology. It also enabled the Philistines to make chariots, a superior chariot, because the bearing and the axle of a chariot made out of bronze was not a very durable thing. They tended to break down. Your wheel would fall off in the middle of a battle, and that's not good. But the iron chariots, and with those iron axles and that iron bushing to hold the axle in, that would have been a far superior kind of a chariot to make as well. After David kind of secures the throne for himself. It's very interesting that David goes and he defeats the Philistines and subdues them, and David takes and they make special mention of this Metheg Amma out of the hand of the Philistines. This we're not entirely certain where this is. Some people think it's this rocky outcrop south. Some people think it may be actually a place inside the Philistine territory. But almost everybody says we think that this Metheg Amma right here, this refers to iron. That David was seizing some center of iron production from the Philistines. That David himself represents the transition from a Bronze Age culture into an Iron Age culture. So this is actually kind of interesting that the Philistines brought iron to the Israelites, and that David is a successful king in large part because he takes advantage of that. He is the one who adopts the new technology. And so in the passage we read today, the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. That's from 1 Samuel 27. What was he doing there? Quite likely, one of the things he was engaged in was not only this sort of deceit and deception of the Philistines, this sort of double agent in their midst, but he was also engaged in what might be called industrial espionage. He was stealing, if you will, the secret of how to work this other metal, this iron, which would give him a better sword and a better weapon to be able to wage the wars that he is going to wage very successfully after he gets this. It's also, I think, kind of interesting that when David is fleeing from Saul that time, the sword of Goliath has been laid behind the altar at Nob, and he takes it, and he says, "There's not another sword like it." Now that could be simply because it was bigger, but you almost get the sense that it's better, and it probably is because it's an iron sword. So there's just a little bit about King David among the Philistines. They're not the unsophisticated and barbarous people that we oftentimes make them out to be. They were, in fact, the people who brought technology and who brought a certain kind of art and culture into the Holy Land. They've left an enormous impact upon it. In fact, even, like we said, to the name of the place today. I hope and pray this has been kind of interesting for you. It's always interesting for me. If you want to talk more about this, we'll be in church on Sunday, and you're always welcome to send me an email about it. God be with you. Bye-bye.